You're looking a bit tired, Dave, after last week's excitement. Are you feeling a bit tired?
Little bit tired still, yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. I've been listening to some new music that might help you relax.
Okay.
Found a new band on Spotify called The Quilted. Their own music's not very good, but they're pretty good at covers. You didn't even do
I didn't even groan. I groaned internally, Pete. There was sufficient groanage. I stared at the camera with an appropriate amount of disdain for your dad humour.
Yeah.
I feel that was good.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody to what is undoubtedly episode 33 of season 2 of the Constant Geekery podcast. Whether you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes or your favourite podcasting platform of choice, or whether you've chosen to gaze upon our beautiful visage, youtube.com/The Constant Geekery podcast.
You know it makes sense.
Or not, as the case may be. I just want to say we didn't do a podcast last week, and the reason for that is that we did the live event instead. So hopefully most of you caught that on the main channel. Very exciting stuff. And we really only have one topic today. We are just going to talk about the new MacBooks, because frankly, talking about anything else would be just pointless at this point in time. I feel for a channel specialising in Apple tech. Yeah,
we should definitely talk about the new iPhone. I agree. So the iPhone 13, what does everyone think? Are we excited? Oh no, MacBooks, that's what it was. So was it MacBook Pros, I think it was, wasn't it?
There are some new MacBook Pros on the way. I'm sure everybody knows about that. But we're going to talk about that today. Before we do that, just wanted to say, and feel free to skip ahead if you don't want to listen to this bit of waffle, but for regular listeners/viewers of the podcast, we've come up with a bit of an idea for our scheduling. Pete, you yourself are having some vacation time at the end of November.
Indeed, that's the plan.
And we don't anticipate podcasting in December, but we are going to do a live show. So, and then next year we'll start season 3 of the podcast. And what our plan is that we'll do a live show as the first podcast of each month. And that will be on a Tuesday at 4 p.m. UK time.
So you can tune in unless it's not convenient, in which case you can just watch it later.
Yeah, and we will still record the audio and publish that on all the usual podcasting platforms. So just a bit of an idea for making it a bit more interesting, a bit more interactive, having that opportunity once a month to
mix it up and interact with you guys on a more direct basis, which is was really good fun, the live event last week. I mean, obviously really exciting news, but for me, what made it that much more special was interacting with all of you guys, all of you that listen. So thank you for that. I think we had consistently over 500 concurrently listening, which is amazing. So thank you for your support.
Thank you very much. And welcome to new subscribers. Let's get into the meat and bones of our podcasting today. And we are just going to focus on these new MacBook Pros. We've got a 14-inch, we've got a 16-inch, and we've got 2 new chips as well, except it's not 2, it's 5.
Yeah, and
2 chips, but 5 permutations.
Yeah, and that confused me. That gave me decision paralysis on the night when I was trying to decide what to order.
That was difficult. Some of you have been quite concerned for Pete's decision paralysis and whether or not he actually did manage to order his MacBook Pro, and we can confirm that Pete did indeed order a MacBook Pro.
I did.
And we'll share what that is in a little bit. I think we should start by talking about the chips, though, and those 5 variations.
Yeah, go on then. You're the chip man. Yeah, you're a big fan of chips.
I do like chips, or as my wife will tell you.
Yeah, fries, as the
Americans like to call them.
Our US friends will call them. So.
Once in America, I went for a cheesesteak, and I wanted it with chips, and they said, "Would you like that with chips?" So I said, "Yes, please," and they delivered it with crisps.
You got some crisps, yeah.
So that was my fault. Bit of a language faux pas there. So when it comes to the chips, what Apple are doing is binning the chips. And I did a video about this on the main channel, so that's youtube.com/constantgeekery. And I noticed from some of the comments that people don't understand binning, or they feel that if they get a binned chip with the cores switched off, that they're somehow getting an inferior product.
Right, okay. So it's probably good to just go through that whole process again. We have talked about it before, and maybe a whole video on binning might be might be wise at some point.
Might do that at some point. So the basic principle is that every design that you tape out or send to the fabricators is going to cost you money, a lot of money, and to put that into fabrication. But what happens is that you get a percentage of yield. So depending on how complex your design is and how complex the process is, some of it won't work, or it won't work as you expect it to work. So you end up wasting silicon. So what companies tend to do is they put their biggest design through. So let's take Intel, for example. They'll send a Core i9 design through. And I don't know if this is exactly what Intel are doing with their models. It's just I'm generalising a bit.
You're illustrating the principle.
Yeah. So perhaps there's I don't know. Let's in our fictitious example, let's say there's an 8-core i9, and Intel send that to fabrication. And what they find then is some of those chips perform really well and can be overclocked. So they'll make a K version, and those very best examples will become the K enthusiast version that can be overclocked.
Yeah.
Some of them won't work, and one or more cores might not be working properly. So perhaps they sell it as a 6-core i7.
Yeah.
And then maybe you get others where they're not working quite as well as that. So that becomes maybe a quad-core i5 or a 6-core i5, but running at a lower frequency. Now, so this is normal behavior. AMD do it, NVIDIA are doing it, everybody does it. The difference is that these other companies will apply these different model numbers. So it's like, oh, I'm getting an i5 or I'm getting an i7. Apple aren't doing that.
They're basically telling you what they've turned off.
Yeah. Now, you could argue that's worse for consumers, or you could argue it's better for consumers, and I'm not sure I have an opinion either way. It's just different. So it's no different to what Intel are doing, though, in terms of switching bits and pieces off. And actually, it's good for the environment because it means less wastage. It means everything gets used. It's a much more cost-effective way of doing things, and that keeps prices down across the board.
Yeah, and you're not getting an inferior product. You are getting something that is described as is. So chips are very different from, say, a car. If you had an engine, let's say you went for a V8 and you actually found that only 7 of the cylinders were firing, well, that would be a faulty engine, and you'd be quite within your rights to be disappointed with that. But let's say that you bought a V6 and you knew it was a V6 and all 6 cylinders ran, you'd be happy with that. If you bought a V8 and all 8 cylinders ran, you'd be happy with that. So essentially what Apple are doing is saying this is however many core CPU or however many core GPU, and that's what you're getting. It's not that it's faulty, it's just that some of it's switched off because it's not reliable, but it is different. We're talking about microscopic stuff here, as opposed to big functional mechanical things. So you're not getting a raw deal.
No. So the first 2 chips, which are only available on the 14-inch, both have 2 of the GPU cores switched off. And the entry level has 2 of the CPU cores switched off, which are the performance cores.
Yeah.
So there's obviously going to be a performance difference with that, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. You don't know with that chip whether you're getting something which had 2 faulty CPU cores and 2 faulty GPU cores, or whether it had just 1 faulty GPU core, but they still switched off the other good cores to sell it.
Yeah.
So you don't really know what you're getting. The other thing is as well, if you go for the M1 Max with the 24-core GPU, there's only a 24-core and a 32-core, but that's an 8 GPU core difference, and it could just be 1 core that's not working. And so it is kind of frustrating and a little bit weird to get your brain around to think that maybe there's 7 fully functional cores in there that are just switched off.
It's a bit like when you ask for a single espresso, isn't it? And you know that half another espresso is getting thrown away because they always make them as doubles.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you just give me the double?
Yeah.
But of course you're not gonna have that.
So anyway, there's your chip binning, and there's the first 2 examples of the chips. So the M1 Pro, you can have as an 8-core or a 10-core CPU, and you can have it as a 14-core or a 16-core GPU. So there are effectively 3 models of the M1 Pro.
Yeah.
The first 2 are only available in the 14-inch, and the normal one is available in the 14-inch and the 16-inch. And with the M1 Pro, you can have 16 or 32 gigabytes of RAM. Then we move up to the M1 Max, which has a number of differences. It's got wider bandwidth, so double the memory bandwidth. So also, someone mentioned on and I need to check this out, whether it's got more cache as well, which would make it faster.
That would make it faster.
So you can have that as, again, it's the same 10-core CPU on both of those chips, but you can have a 24-core GPU or a 32-core GPU, and you can have that chip with 32 gigs or 64 gigs of RAM. So those are the difference. And I think the purchasing page on Apple is actually a little bit confusing, because
Massively.
you'll go and you'll switch up to the M1 Max in the processor section of the page, and it will give you the upgrade price for whatever that is. But then you actually do it, and suddenly the total at the bottom of the page jumps up by loads more.
Yep.
And of course, that's because it's jumped the memory up for you as well. If you were on 16 gig, you have to have 32 so it whacks the price up. So I think a few people are getting a little bit lost in this. So what I wondered, Pete, is whether although we haven't received the machines yet, and we probably should say we're recording this podcast on a Monday.
Yep, it's not the usual Tuesday fare for various reasons.
And it's 5:15, and I'm absolutely shattered. So if we look like we're kind of hanging, then that's...
I always look that way. No.
We've had a bit of a faux pas with recording a video today, which meant we had to record it again. So we're late doing the podcast. But this will actually go up on Tuesday. So by the time that you're listening to and or watching this...
Dave should be salivating over the first of our new MacBook Pros.
Should be. And frantically trying to... put some sort of sense into it so I can release some content. So I've forgotten where I was going with that, but we haven't got them yet. But I think before we get these models, do we have any insights on where the best buys are, where the sweet points are in the range? I'm going to crack open the Apple website.
I'll do that as well. I think it's fair to say while you're doing that a lot of us all felt a little bit paralysed when these were announced and immediately available for order during the event. And I can't help but wonder if that was kind of deliberate to kind of just drive demand, because the delivery dates were being pushed out as we watched during the live event. I was getting quite anxious. And so I have seen a lot of comments that people have gone out and bought videos already, and they're already getting a little bit of regret because they're not sure if they've gone for the right model. Have they chosen right, or have they gone too much or too little? Are you feeling like that? I'm not, on the whole. There is one little thing which we'll talk about in a minute that I feel I'm more miffed about in principle than actually worried about. But it's a bit stressful. So
okay, so whilst Pete gets his iPad onto the Apple website as well, I think it's worth saying as well, we've got a slight return in design aesthetic to the old unibody and the polycarbonate.
Absolutely fantastic. I know it's not everyone's loving it, but I think it's great.
Now, what's interesting though is that it's no thicker than the MacBook Pro that comes before it, but because it doesn't have the beveling at the edges and the rounded nature of it,
it looks chunkier.
It does look chunkier, but I don't mind that.
And the lid's thicker.
Yeah, I don't mind that either.
I don't mind that either, because obviously I'm presuming that's to hold the mini LED display, which is probably a little bit chunkier, and obviously that bigger webcam, that high resolution 1080p webcam.
So we are going to talk about the notch. We do need to talk about the notch, but just generally ports-wise, you're getting an additional Thunderbolt port. There's the return of MagSafe, which is great, and you're getting HDMI and an SD card reader.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of functionality coming with this. You mentioned the mini LED display.
Coming back. Lots of ports coming back. Yeah.
Touch bar's gone. Keyboard is better.
Yeah.
And it also looks a lot nicer as well because it's got a black deck underneath it. It does
very
look
smart
very
looking.
cool. So you've got Touch ID and a full-size function keys. Lots of people happy with that. That mini LED display with a higher resolution, although it does have the notch, and a 1080p camera. So those are the kind of main differences. The speakers are a lot better.
They are. Microphones are better.
Microphones are better. Well, this is what Apple are telling us. We haven't tested that yet. So what I wanted to do, I think you'll see why we've just run through those initial specs first of all, because let's start at the starting point. And I'll tell you what, Pete, you're on the UK site. I'm just going to flick over to the US website because I know we've got listeners from all over the world. So let's do US dollar prices and pounds as well. So if we start with the entry-level 14-inch, now in America that's going to come in at $2,000. Let's not bother with this $1 less business.
No.
So that's $2,000. In the UK, it is
1,900.
1,900. Now, if you're going to order one of these, or should you order one of these, so this is the entry-level 14-inch, you're getting the 8-core CPU and 14-core GPU. Does that make any sense at all as a machine? Does that represent good value?
I would say it does, because you're still getting an incredible step up in performance from the M1. Not that the M1 is in any way a slouch, and again, that's something we probably need to talk about, not today, but about those who might feel, if they've got an M1, am I shortchanged, am I envious? But this is still an incredible processor at a very keen price when you compare it to previous machines.
Well, let's do that. You keep that page up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to now price up a equivalent spec 13-inch MacBook Pro M1. So we've got the M1 chip with 8-core CPU and 8-core GPU, 512 gigs of storage, and we need to increase the memory because this one's coming, the new one comes with 16 gigs. So let me put 16 gig in. So that comes out at $1,700. So the difference is $300 between the equivalent storage and memory in the 13-inch.
Yeah.
So the differences are, obviously, you're getting the smaller screen and the older display technology. You are getting a touch bar, but you're missing out on these additional ports.
Yeah.
And missing out on that webcam, speakers, and other things. So there are things about the chassis that you might think, that's worth $300. But let's talk about CPU performance. Yes, it's an 8-core versus an 8-core, but the balance of the cores is different, and the memory bandwidth is different.
Yeah.
So M1's got 4 of the performance, 4 of the efficiency. M1 Pro
6 of the performance, 2 of the efficiency.
Okay, so that will give you, and I know benchmarks have been circulating, but let's just talk real world, general average real world uplift of maybe 20%, possibly a bit more.
Probably.
So the M1 Pro is giving you a performance uplift, and that's not an insignificant performance uplift either. That's a pretty decent one. Now, what we're talking about there in performance is multi-core performance. When it comes to single-core performance, there's not a lot of difference between them at all, because it is essentially the same chip.
Yeah.
So if you know that you've got an application that benefits from multi-core performance, then the M1 Pro will be a step up in terms of CPU. But how many cores in the GPU, Pete? 14. Versus 8 here. So we're getting an additional 6 GPU cores, which are accessing memory at three times memory bandwidth.
Yeah, and more of it, more available to the system. Well, actually, sorry, no, because we're comparing like with like, aren't we?
Yeah. So is that worth $300? I mean, that is a significant step up in GPU. It's got to be 70-80% uplift in performance on GPU, plus faster, 20 to 25% faster on CPU, perhaps, in multi-threaded. Plus, you get in the latest chassis, the better keyboard,
that great
additional
display,
ports.
webcam.
It looks like an amazing deal until you then go, well, what about an M1 MacBook Air? So let's just do that as well. If we could take a MacBook Air, which offers pretty much all of the performance of a MacBook Pro. In fact, some people are saying that it actually performs better than the MacBook Pro.
Are they? Interesting.
I've seen examples of both, where the MacBook Pro wins and the MacBook Air wins, so I think it's just a bit of a silicon lottery, to be honest, but there we go. So let me select again 512 gigs of storage, the M1 chip with the 8 cores of CPU and GPU, and we'll do that memory upgrade, and that's coming out at $1,450. So now we are $550 away. But do we think that these upgrades are still worth $550?
That's a very difficult question, because I think for a lot of people it will come down to, have I got $550 to make up the difference? So let's just assume for a minute you have. Okay, and if you haven't, we completely understand that. We've been there, and you're still getting a great machine with the MacBook Air. But I think if you just look at the performance alone, when it's $300 more, it's a no-brainer. If you add the display, the webcam, the extra connectivity, which eliminates the cost of some dongles and that kind of thing, plus the convenience, the portability of that, the increased battery life.
Yeah, we didn't mention that. Yeah.
I would say if you've got the $550, personally, I think you would be mad not to go for the new MacBook Pro. Do you agree?
I do agree. And there's a caveat to this, because we're just assuming that you need that additional performance, and a lot of people will want that. And at the end of the day, if that's what you want, it's your money, spend it how you like, as we always say. Do you need it? The vast majority of people don't need more than an M1.
Well, I think, interestingly, Luke Myani did a video the other day where because need is always subjective, even if you, in theory, do need it. He came up with the term justified. Can you justify it? And I think that's a really insightful comment by Luke there, because often we can justify it as opposed to really, really needing it. So can you justify it?
Well, there you go. That's only you can answer.
You can answer.
Yeah. But I do think if you've bought an M1 recently and you're thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done that or whatever, I wouldn't be upset about it. I think M1, these new machines are still M1. You know, they're just adding more. And the more that they're adding is very specifically for professionals. Most people are never going to use more multi-core performance than M1 already provides. I mean, bear in mind that it's providing more than any PC notebook.
It's incredible.
Already.
It's incredible. If you've got an M1 and you've not been hitting performance blocks, which, let's be fair, unless you're a pro, in which case you probably have bought one out of interest more than doing it for genuine workflow, you probably haven't been hitting those blocks. Don't worry.
No. So the next step, let's have a look at maybe some of these other options as well. And let's maybe go to the entry-level 16-inch now. Now, this comes in at $2,500 US and
£2,400.
Okay. And for this, you're getting the full version of the M1 Pro, so the 10-core CPU, the 16-core GPU, 16 gigs of memory, 512 gigs of storage. You're getting that larger chassis, so if you want a 16-inch, it's the way to go. I don't think that seems to me to be any different to the entry-level price of the 16-inch as it was with Intel. For a 6-core Intel, I'm pretty sure it's $2,400.
Yeah, you're probably right. I need to double-check that, but yeah, you're probably right.
And for that, you were getting a 5300M, which is pretty much the same sort of performance as standard M1.
Yep.
And a CPU that's considerably slower than standard M1. So this represents a significant upgrade if you like that larger chassis for the same price. Now, Pete, you've highlighted the power adapter on your screen.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the 16-inch ones have 140-watt power adapters as opposed to, I think, 67 on the 14-inch.
It's 96 actually on the 14-inch, but it's 67
on the entry level.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight that. It's a £20 upgrade, and you need to do that. If you don't do that, you don't get the 50% battery charged in half an hour. And we stupidly ordered one of those entry-level ones. That's what's coming tomorrow with the 67-watt charger. So I can't test the charging 50% in half an hour thing because I didn't spot that.
Let's just be clear. You didn't spring the £20 for the extra charger, but you sprung the £20 for the polishing cloth.
Obviously. No, I didn't.
No, that's crazy.
So, yeah, if you are buying the entry-level one, do upgrade the power supply because you do get an extra function. I think it's worth it. The 14-inch models are limited to 96 watts, which is more than enough for the M1 Max, which Apple showed if you were absolutely cooking on it, the CPU was pulling about 30 watts and the GPU was about 60 watts.
Yep.
So 6 watts spare, you should be able to run it at full tilt without losing any battery. If you run the base level model at full tilt, whilst it's plugged in, will it start draining the battery? Probably not. It'll probably
just about manage, won't it? But I agree. The £20 uplift to get the higher wattage charger will pay dividends that time when you're like, oh no, I haven't charged my battery and you need it quickly. Just having that extra oomph will make all the difference.
Yeah, and interestingly, it only does that through MagSafe, as far as I'm... again, we will test it once we get the models with the faster chargers.
So many tests to do.
So many tests. So the 16 gig entry level model is a good upgrade on the previous. Now, that 140 watts, why are you getting additional wattage for the 16-inch model if the M1 Max is only pulling 90 watts? I think there are two reasons.
Display?
Could be, well, the larger display, but it is LED at the end of the day.
Bigger battery?
The bigger battery, obviously you still get, Apple didn't differentiate that fast charge between the two models.
No.
So it still needs to be able to charge half of its much bigger battery.
I wonder if it has anything to do with the high performance mode.
Yes, high performance mode.
We'll come to that in a minute.
Okay, I think that's what it is, and also probably better thermal performance. So if you are planning to run these things at full tilt, then the 16-inch is going to be faster.
Or what you could do is just plug loads of power supplies into all the USB-Cs and have it being powered from all sorts of directions. Don't do that.
Just to clarify, that doesn't work. The Mac will pick the one with the most wattage, and that's it, and ignore the rest. The thing you could do, of course, is put your Mac in a freezer whilst you use it, and then you might be able to achieve the maximum performance. But generally speaking, you're going to get better thermals with the 16-inch. But when we say that 16-inch is going to end up being faster than the 14-inch, how much do we think is going to be in it? I don't think a lot, but again, maybe we'll come to that in a moment. So if you take size out of the equation, I think the sweet spot, if you're looking for maximum performance, a really good performer without going beyond what's actually needed, I think the spec that I've gone for is the sweet spot.
And would you like to reveal to our dear listeners what spec you've gone for?
I opted for the M1 Max with the 24-core GPU.
Hang on, what size?
14-inch.
Okay.
I don't get on with the larger laptops, so that's what I've chosen. And yeah, with the 24-core GPU and the 32 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage, and that comes in at $3,000 in the UK, which sounds absolutely crazy. But earlier this year, when I had to give up my Mac laptop for one of our developers in the business, so I've not had a work laptop since earlier this year, and I decided what I'll do is I'll buy a Windows laptop. And I was going to get the X13 from Asus with the 3080 eGPU. And if you spec that up, that comes to $3,000, or it did at the time anyway. So this is the same price as that. But what I'm getting with Apple is a much faster CPU. I'm getting a slightly slower GPU when it comes to raw compute power, but because it's got all of those extra optimizations, in my real-world use case, it's going to be a lot quicker. So I don't think that's an outrageous price compared to PCs. No. I also don't have to carry around an extra eGPU and power supply.
No. And also you don't have to cook your legs when you're using it.
Yeah. I mean, I actually went, in the end, I bought a Razer Blade Stealth 13, and that retails supposedly at $2,000 or something. I mean, I got it a lot cheaper than that, but it's got a 1650 Ti in it and the 11th gen Intel i7. It's nowhere near as quick as an M1, but it's not a terrible laptop. But it does do what you say. It's got fan exits or intakes on the bottom, so you can't actually put it on your lap. It's just
let's just go back to the beginnings of the Constant Geekery channel, which is youtube.com/Constant Geekery. If you've not already subscribed, what you're playing at. Part of the original premise of that channel was you were going to treat yourself to a Mac Pro, weren't you? Back in the distant past.
I was.
Before you got into the trash can action and all that kind of thing.
I was. I was working with the 12-core 5.1 that I had, but yeah.
Yeah, but you were going to treat yourself to a new 2019 Mac Pro, weren't you?
I was. That was the plan.
So let me ask you this. Does the MacBook Pro that you have now spec'd up give you, or will it give you, comparable performance to what you would have got with that 2019 Mac Pro?
I think in some areas, no. Just trying to think of the spec I was actually going to be able to afford and go for. No, I tell a lie. It probably will outperform it.
Right, for a lot less money.
Less than half.
Yeah. So you've treated yourself to something after having got by on poverty spec machines for a while, and an iPad Pro with M1 today.
I see, you're winding me up. Excellent. I do have a very powerful workstation at home, and I'm very interested. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that. The
the Threadripper.
all guns blazing 32-core Threadripper with 2 NVIDIA GPUs in it. Will it compete with Apple M1? Be interested to see.
If that Threadripper was a television or movie character, it would be Ed 209 from RoboCop. That's what I think of when I look at your Threadripper. I don't know. Just brutal, and it will just munch through things, but no intelligence whatsoever. Whereas this is data from Star Trek, which I know you're a fan of. It's high compute power, intelligent, elegant. Everyone loves it.
Okay. I will bring my workstation in for testing. There's no point in testing against any kind of Intel laptop. I think that would be unfair to Intel.
So, anyway, when's the MacBook Pro that because we've got a few arriving, haven't we? We've got one for test.
Yeah.
We've got one for you.
Yeah, so I've got mine comes, and yours is coming in the same batch, and it will be 2 weeks today, apparently, at the earliest.
Awesome.
So we got 2 weeks of testing out the entry-level one and putting it through its paces, and then we will do some serious comparisons. We'll be doing some video editing and other things.
But I think it's good to start with the entry-level one, because that, I think for those that have chosen that one, it just shows what this machine will do at its very basic levels, which is really good.
Yeah, and I do think that is a good one of the good machines to buy. So if I was choosing one of these things, those are the 2 choices I'd probably go for, because you get the best of most of that performance. You really don't need more CPU performance. You're getting more GPU performance, which is what we always wanted from M1, and you're getting it at the attractive price point.
I also want to see how the 14-inch, which is what I've gone for, compares to my 16-inch MacBook Pro with obviously thicker bezels, and also a 13-inch MacBook Pro. I want to just see how that stacks up. I think I've made the right choice, although a lot of people out there are getting selection regret. Maybe they've gone for the wrong size, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. It's all very subjective.
I think it's amusing how the selection regret seems to be timed also with the news of the high power mode that's available in the 16-inch.
Yeah.
They do seem to have coincided with each other.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So Mac Rumors obtained an internal Apple document that indicates that users will be able to enable something called high power mode, which is basically the same as pressing the turbo button on your DX4 back in the day, or ludicrous mode in your Tesla, and that will give you extreme performance for things like color grading in 8K or ProRes video, that kind of thing. But you have to have, as far as we can tell, a 16-inch MacBook Pro has to have an M1 Max chip in it, and it has to be running Monterey. So in theory, that will do that, but it will also, at that point, imitate an Intel machine and probably burn through your legs, because it's going to be using literally every shred of power. The fans will probably come on. So how do we feel about that? How do you feel about that if you've gone for a 14-inch?
I personally wouldn't. I mean, I know you're sort of just generally asking the listeners, but I personally wouldn't be bothered by that at all. No, it doesn't bother me to lose the high power mode, because when would you actually use it? One of the real points of going for these machines is to not have that situation where you've got the fans blowing and everything else. I mean, these chips are drawing significantly more wattage than standard M1. Mm-hmm. So this whole idea of fanless and everything, don't expect there to be no fan noise with these new MacBooks. They've got 2 fans in them. They are going to blow the fans if you're working it hard. But how often are you going to be working a laptop with a previously unheard of amount of performance in the notebook sector? How often are you going to be pushing that so hard that you think to yourself, what I need right now is high power mode?
Well, let's use the ludicrous mode that you get on a Tesla as an example of that. You've got that button and you can press it, and it does give you absolute phenomenal performance, but at a massive cost to A, your battery on your car, and B, your potential life or license, because it is so crazy that probably most of the time you're not going to be driving around in ludicrous mode, because it's just impractical. And I suspect this high performance or high power mode will be similar. It will be one of those things that you're probably thinking, I should have gone for that so I can do that, but you will never ever use it apart from as a party trick. I used to have launch control on one of my cars. Guess how many times I used that?
Once.
Correct. It's a party trick. You don't need launch control on a car that goes on the road. Prove me wrong.
No, well, it's true. You don't. So, let's think about the range again. Then, if you're looking at buying one of these machines, what do you actually need in terms of performance? I'm of the opinion, and you probably won't share this opinion, or maybe you will, but I'm of the opinion that very, very few, a very small demographic of purchaser would actually be able to utilise more than 32 gigs of RAM.
Honestly, no one is going to need any more than that. No one's going to need 64 gig of RAM.
How much RAM did you go for with your selection, Pete, just out of interest?
I'm struggling to remember because it was a week ago and I was very tired at the time. I think it might have been...
What was that, sorry?
64 gig of RAM.
You did, didn't you?
I did.
And which of the CPU selections did you... obviously, it had to be a Max.
I went for an M1 Max, yeah.
Yeah. And which of the two M1 Maxes did you go for? Did you go for the Max or the Mini Max?
Yeah, I might have gone for the Max.
Fully loaded. Because what that means is we've got a fully loaded M1 Max coming to play with.
We've got the whole range coming, really, pretty much. We haven't got all 5, but we've got 3.
Yeah, although I think Tom in the end did go for the same as me.
Okay.
So that doesn't really help us with our testing portfolio. Thanks for that, Tom.
Yeah.
For ruining everything by spending extra money.
But, I've got some complex calculations to make. I need to do some weather modelling. And,
Your purchase, and I have no argument with this whatsoever because I've done exactly the same thing with my workstation at home. We've worked in IT for a long time. For me, it's 25 years, or to put it another way, a quarter of a century. And you're older than me, Pete.
I am.
So you're similarly aged when it comes to IT. Have you ever had a really, really nice computer like that? We've had some nice computers, but I mean, one of these top tier.
It's one of those things, isn't it? When you've been in the game this long,
that's in the game and not on the game. Just clarifying.
You always want that, don't you? You know you don't need it, but you always want to just have the fully decked out, no holds barred machine. And I've had some nice machines in my time, but I've never, because it's always been, we've always said, shall I go for that? It's like, well, you don't really need it. It's like, I don't, I'll be sensible. This time I treated myself. I pushed it out, got off my wallet, which I keep under the soap, and went for it because I think this is probably once in a lifetime opportunity, and I've never been as excited about a computer as this in terms of the process of the whole release, not just my personal computer. So I thought I want to go for the full fat, triple whopper experience.
Yeah. So, and to be clear, there's really no issue in doing that. Now, our situation is we get an allowance to purchase a laptop, which is nowhere near enough to go for one of these machines. So we then top it up personally to have what we want, which is what we're allowed to do with our business. Which
reminds me, I won't be here next week because I've got a small kidney operation to have.
But it's a valid point. It is something special. It is a game-changing thing. It's a unique moment in the history of computing. And I hope I'm not overplaying it there, but it really is unprecedented performance in a notebook. And I'm quite excited about it. I wanted to be part of it. I've been waiting for this ever since M1 was announced because I knew as soon as I saw those M1 machines, they were not for me.
No.
So I've been waiting a long time to have this. So I think a lot of people out there are the same. They've been waiting for these MacBook Pros. They wanted the ports back. Apple has listened and it's given us this stuff, and we're excited about it. But if you're struggling to know which one to buy, well, as we've said, you can get into it at the entry level and you'll be really happy with that machine. I think if you're going to go to the M1 Max, probably the 24 core with the 32 gig of RAM is
more than enough.
For the vast majority of people, unless you specifically need that additional GPU performance. But what you will find is that there's diminishing returns as you go from 24 to 32 cores. It's not as big an improvement as 24 is over 16. So that's what we're expecting. So that's probably a good place to pitch it. 64 gigs of RAM, you'll know if you need that. And if you don't know if you do, then you don't.
You probably don't.
No.
I think it's probably good at this point to ask people is there anything you'd like us to test? I think there's been some comments on the main channel about things that people want us to test, but I'd like to know from our subscribers on the podcast channel, is there anything crazy on that fully decked out machine that you want me to try within reason? I'm not going to see if it bounces off a 20-foot building or something like that from a computing point of view. Have you got some footage you want to send us to really max that out? Have you got some 8K footage? I know someone sent some 4K B-roll before, didn't they?
Yeah, we had some HEVC as well. If you've got something specific to test, I mean, our area of expertise, or if you can call it that, is we're familiar with Final Cut Pro. Hello? some sort of...
If you're hearing a few noises in the background, by the way, as Dave mentioned at the beginning, we're shooting this on a Monday, and it's fair to say I don't think we've let everyone in the building know that. So I think we've had a few doors and bangs and creaks on this that you may hear, but hey, that's live broadcasting for you.
So I've totally lost my train of thought then. Oh, well, yeah, so very familiar with DaVinci Resolve, and we'll definitely be testing that, especially version 17.4. I'm reasonably familiar with Logic Pro, but I probably don't have enough files to really push that.
I'm a big GarageBand user.
But things like Avid, Pro Tools don't really use Adobe Premiere, don't really use Adobe After Effects. So we have access to Adobe stuff. We've got a full creative license, so we could test something if somebody wants to donate some stuff. Somebody asked me about machine learning tests. Don't have any clue how to perform those. If you want to provide the stuff and the instructions, we'll do those tests and see how they perform. And, anything like that, really. I mean, Xcode, we know Xcode. I don't have any projects that I can really do compile testing on, and you probably don't want to send us yours. But I imagine that there are some things where we could do some tests.
We have got some Xcode projects in the business that we could run on it, but I suspect compared to the really big stuff that really makes Xcode chunder, we've probably not got anything like that. But yeah, just give us ideas, send us what you can, and assume if it's one of the things outside the areas that Dave mentioned that we don't know what we're doing. So give us the instructions on what you want us to do, and we'll try and at least give some comparisons of doing those things on different machines, and try and help you with some, as usual, constant geekery style, real world view as opposed to sensationalism.
Yeah, and we will try to make sense of what we're doing as well, rather than just do it and present results. We will obviously do benchmarks, and we will test against different machines. When we do the video edit test, we'll test against our Intel iMac, the i9, and we will also throw in my crazy workstation for laughs.
It would be rude not to.
Yeah. Probably that will be the big test that we do will be video testing, and I realise that a lot of YouTube users get fed up with seeing that, but it is what we do,
and it is one of the prime reasons that people would choose a machine like this. I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it's one of the prime reasons.
Absolutely. I think I just wanted to mention the notch. I don't want to go too deep into this because I'm not going to form an opinion until I actually see it in the flesh. Other than to say I would prefer that there were no notch, but I suspect I will get used to it very quickly.
But I think everyone's got it wrong. There isn't a notch. There's extra bits of screen that goes up.
That's what I gave Dave said when he was on our live show.
I knew I'd heard it from somewhere. Thanks for the bit there I gave. But he's right.
It is true.
Compare it next to the 13-inch, you can see that the screen's a different aspect ratio. You've got a taller screen. You're getting more screen. Stop whinging. Not that you're whinging, but some people are whinging. Not saying you're whinging personally, but some people are whinging.
I was going to try and sit more on the fence there and not upset people either way.
About the notch.
No.
I might do when I've got it, but at the moment I don't care.
A lot of people do.
It's good in dark mode.
I know that one of our subscribers has pointed out that the Dell XPS has the same kind of slim bezels and a 1080p camera without a notch. So it is possible. That said, there's no way on a Windows device that you tolerate a notch in the same way that you would on a Mac.
Well,
because of the menu bar.
Yeah, and the OS wouldn't know it was there and all that sort of thing. Mind you, Dell can't say anything about webcams. Do you remember those XPSs we had with the webcam down at the bottom by the keyboard? So basically, you could either see the keyboard or, everyone looked like Miss Piggy. You ever thought about Miss Piggy and Kermit being together?
I don't think about that at all, no, Pete. Funnily enough.
DNA on that would not work, would it?
What bothers me more is that you've devoted brain time to that.
Only while we've been talking.
This is what you're going to use that 64 gigs of RAM for.
Modelling pig and frog DNA. Yeah, that's it.
Excellent. So here's what we're going to do with the coverage. I don't know when the device is coming tomorrow, and I don't want to rush content out if I can help it. But the first video I'll do will just be a sort of first impressions with a few benchmarks. And then it's going to take a few days to really get to grips with the machine, to be able to offer a sensible opinion, because I know that people go out and buy product based on what I might say in my video, and I don't want to be giving out bad advice when people are going to be spending so much money. So I know that lots of other YouTube channels are going to be rushing content up because they need to do it for the clicks and everything else. We'll try and resist that and test the things properly. So we'll give you a quick kind of first impressions video, then we'll start doing a bit more testing. And
that sounds reasonable.
We'll figure out where we go from there. So we've got about 2 weeks to wait until the M1 Max chips, those notebooks arrive, and because we were doing the live event, we won't be the first people getting those because we were late ordering them.
Yeah, we put you guys first.
You did. So do hope that you'll stop by to watch our content on that. And that will be coming sort of throughout November and December. I'm sure it's going to take a long time to test everything on all of these things. We do have day job as well, but we will try and bring that to you. We'll also be using the few podcast episodes that we got left this year just to summarise our thoughts on it as well. So it will be fairly M1 focused for a few more weeks, I think.
Which I'm sure you won't be disappointed with. So if you've got stuff you want us to talk about or investigate or comment on, please let us know in the comments. That's what it's called.
That's it. And have a think about that live show that we'll be doing, the live podcast in December. If you've got any questions that you want particularly featured on there, that would be great. And I've also wondered about the possibility of doing a live show where we do live benchmarking and testing and stuff. But I wondered whether that might be possible. But we'll need to think about that because it's having all the software and the kit to do the tests. That's the problem.
You could even do some live challenges where people send stuff in to us. One of us knows what it is, but the other one doesn't, and you just go grade that or render that or do stuff like that.
Okay.
So we could have some fun.
We could. So any ideas that you've got, share them in the comments section.
Make us interesting.
And we probably got to wrap it up there. And I realise that means we're going to miss out on hearing Pete do a jingle and doing any rumour mill stuff. But unfortunately, time's run away with us today and we need to get away. So
I will be working on a new rumour mill jingle on GarageBand.
Will you?
With my new M1 when it comes.
Okay.
And you'll be able to tell the difference because it's been done on an M1 Max over an M1.
I cannot wait to hear it.
I can see that your breath is bated.
Thanks very much, everybody, for tuning in to this podcast episode, and we'll see you again next time on the Constant Geekery podcast.
Cheerio.
Cheerio.